Seemingly, a miracle just happened, but Peter Parker doesn't believe in miracles, because if God was real, why isn't Uncle Ben still around? Welcome to the Complete Story series where I take trade paperbacks and single issues and I break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then I read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Now, if you hadn't figured it out from our opener line, this one does deal with religion. Not very heavily, and it's not super heavy-handed, but it does deal with it. So if you're uncomfortable with that, maybe this isn't the video for you. Also, this does take place in the all-new, all-different Marvel. It's a point series, which basically means that it takes place between 2 issues. So this takes place between issues 1 and 2 of Amazing Spider-Man and the all-new, all-different Marvel. It's the holiday season in New York, and Peter Parker is swinging through the town singing carols. But for the family of Julio Rodriguez, holiday is less than cheerful, as Julio is being laid down to rest. The crowds begin to clear out and the cemetery falls silent, but there's something stirring in Julio's grave. And then he rises. The next day, as Peter heads back to work, he watches on the news as a recently buried Julio has somehow mysteriously risen from the grave and he's now walking among the living. Could it be the work of God? Has he finally graced the greatest city, New York, with his presence? The question goes out to Julio. What has he come back to tell us? Then after hearing the news, Peter heads over to the office of the chief medical examiner to try and find out what's going on. Once inside, Peter goes to see Dr. Templeton as she was the one who examined Julio. She shows Peter different bodies, both missing organs, explaining that even once they have been put back together and sewed up, these bodies won't come back to life. Julio, though, he had all of his organs removed and then put back. So if he was actually alive, she would have killed him a while ago. Peter then asks, how is it that he came crawling out of his grave and now he's walking around like a real boy? And she tells him, as a scientist, she has no explanation. With the press surrounding Julio for this blessing, Peter knows he won't be able to get close and ask any questions directly, so he does the next best thing. He goes to see Julio's kids. Peter loves kids, and kids love Spider-Man. As the kids begin to leave to go out and play, the paparazzi try to swarm around them with questions. But Spider-Man swings in, grabbing the two of them, and as they safely get away, the brother Jamie runs off to get their mom. The little girl, Mara, though, says that they were supposed to go out and get pizza for everyone, but she's pretty sure that she was just sent away to get away from all of the press. And right now, she has a better idea. They should get Piragas. Peter and Mara go down to get Piragas, and they sit down to eat, and Mara explains that it's been crazy ever since her dad got sick. She says that her father had cancer, but there wasn't any money to help with his treatments, so he stopped going. And then he looked up a man named Don Anselmo. Some people called Don a witch doctor, the devil, or even some magical old dude. But before Mara could go on, her mother runs up telling Spider-Man to get away. He's just another vulture like the rest of them. So Peter decides that it's time to follow up on that lead of the Don. Surely there can't be that many Doms in Harlem. And as Peter locates the address of the thankfully only Don Anselmo, he sneaks into his apartment and he finds ritual-like items. He looks at the voodoo dolls and then he picks one up and his head explodes. And the spiders begin to crawl out and up Peter's arm and he laughs, stating it tickles, but there's nothing really scary here. That's when a voice calls out to him asking what he's doing here and Peter screams. He turns around to find a whole group behind him and one of the people from the group asks him, "Did we scare you?" And he tries to tell him, No, but who are you? One of the women says that they are the Santerians. First, they're gonna talk and then they're gonna fight. As the group moves outside of the rooftop, the 6 Santerians introduce themselves and their names, but Peter has a better idea. You see, he gets his name because he has spider-like powers. So instead of their rather odd names, how about he calls them different names? So one of them could be Kid Emo, another one could be the Swirling Charmin, then there could be the Poos Pomade, and then there's the Dreadlock Jordy, and then there could be Coldplay because she's yellow. You know the song Yellow? These are just ideas, they can brainstorm them later. Chango, who was going by the name Poos Pomade, asks if he knows of Santeria, and Peter says that it's a religion, right? Like voodoo. But Ocean, who was going by the name Dreadlock Jordy, mentions that it's more like a belief system where all things in the world are connected. Chango then adds that it's also where they get their powers from, and Peter questions it. So Chango asks if he wants to see their powers. Suddenly he throws fire from his hands, but after he's done, Peter wraps him up in web, telling him the fun's over. Chango mentions that this guy is worse than Parker, and then Peter asks, what does Peter Parker have to do with all of this? In case you forgot, Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same individual, but the world doesn't know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. They say they don't have any problem with Parker, but Julio did, and that's why he went to Cuba last month. Ocean then says that that's why they need Spider-Man to go to Cuba, to find out what happened to Julio. He asks what's going on in Cuba that requires Julio and Peter Parker, and they explain that when Julio became sick, he tried different things to cure it. One of them being the Uncle Ben Foundation, but instead of helping him, they turned him away. So Don Anselmo told him that he could find a miracle in Cuba. They can't go because little Castro has put a price out on their heads. So Spider-Man agrees to help, and he then heads to Cuba, showing Julio's picture to the locals, asking if anyone has seen him. One local says she does remember Julio. He was asking where he can find Babalu, the Orisha of healing. Orisha are spirits. The people of Cuba pray to them for health, strength, and peace, and she told Peter that that's where she's seen Babalu. Babalu came when her baby brother was dying, and he took the illness from the baby brother and put it into himself, but as quickly as he came, he left without saying a word. Now she doesn't know how to find Babalu, as the only people who have seen him was through prayer. But there was a man named Professor Toledo who teaches philosophy, and he may be able to help out Peter. So the next day, Peter heads off to meet with the professor and learns that Babalu is actually being honored tonight at the Church of St. Lazarus, and a feast will be made at Rincon, the restaurant. After getting the address, Peter heads through town and changes into his spider suit and sneaks into the restaurant. And it's there that he sees what looks like a mechanical body with candles all around it, and states that this is clearly a health violation for a restaurant. He begins to pull the sheet off the body, stating that this looks like an obvious trap, and then a crab begins to crawl out of the body's mouth. Peter turns back and sees there are more crustaceans crawling out towards him, and he can't move. The smoke, is it a poison, a sedative? Peter begins to crawl out of the room, and he says either way, he would like a word with the chef about this. As he continues to crawl, a door in front of Peter opens, and Babalu and a woman stand there, stating that they've been waiting for him. Peter tries to ask what they mean, but that's when the figures vanish into thin air, and another one appears. Peter asks what do these figures want from him, but the figure says nothing, just wants to see him. Been a long time. Figure steps into the light to show himself as Uncle Ben. Soon Uncle Ben takes Peter out of the room to let him regain his strength, because that restaurant was rather iffy. And Uncle Ben tells him that everything that he's been taught about the world is wrong, and what waits for them after death is, but Peter stands back up, grabbing Uncle Ben, telling him, I don't care what you have to say. Who are you? What did these people do to Julio? Through his coughs, Uncle Ben tells him that Julio needs his help, but first, he's gonna have to help himself. Peter, you have to help yourself. Peter drops him and begins to walk away, but Ben tells him, it's okay, I forgive you. And Peter stops. As the sun begins to rise, Ben begins stitching up Peter's suit, and Peter tells him, I still don't believe you're Ben Parker. I just came here to help Julio because the Uncle Ben Foundation failed him. So the two of them begin to talk. Peter hears guns being cocked, and the man that appeared before him begins to ask, how did you get outside? Peter says he had a little help from his, but as he looks back, he sees Uncle Ben is gone. And he says, figment of my imagination. Babalu says that it's time for them to go back inside, but Peter starts grabbing chairs with his webbing and swinging them around, hitting anyone in his path. And after the chairs break, Peter then swings in, kicking and punching and grabbing more chairs, hitting the remaining thugs. Peter tells the two from before that they can now put their hands up. And as Peter begins to tie them up, the man says that Julio is dying, and his Lord gave him life. Now his Lord wants his powers, but for now, he must see him. Parts of Babalu's head begin to break and crumble, and soon his entire body falls to dust. While Peter makes his way back to New York, Chango and Ogun capture Julio, trying to get him to explain what happened in Cuba, but Julio won't give them any information. During the car ride, Ogun takes out an isohelix and swabs Julio's mouth with it, stating that he's now free to go. They got what they needed. A short while later, Ocean speaks with the other Santerians, asking if this could possibly actually just be a miracle. But then Spider-Man calls them out, asking if that's really what they think, because that's a little far-fetched. They hand Spider-Man the isohelix, stating that maybe they should just leave Julio alone. He's happy, and that's a good thing. Peter then tells them that the Juju man in Cuba said his Lord brought him back. So if there's a new power in New York, they need to know who it is and which side he's on. After getting Julio's sample, Peter takes it to the only man that he knows who can make any sense of what's happening to Julio, Hank McCoy. And after viewing the test results, Hank tells Peter that their resurrected friend may have joined their ranks of individuals with powers who are possibly viewed as gods, because Julio is not human. During Hank's testing, though, back in Julio's apartment, he meets his father, telling him that they must all make sacrifices for the greater good. He's made his, and now it's his turn. Moments later, Julio turns to his father, telling him that he loves him, and his father sits there, dead. Days later, the town gathers for the services of Mr. Rodriguez, and Peter watches. Everyone is upset except Julio. Even the Santerians are even a little more upset than he is. So why isn't Julio upset that his father died? Later that night, Peter meets up with the Santerians to tell them that he has some troubling news. Julio's father didn't die of a stroke, he was murdered. He confirmed it with the medical examiner. Someone with powers caused this, so it's possible that Julio killed his own father. Chango pushes Peter, telling him to watch what he says about their friend, and Peter explains that Julio is not himself anymore. After they ran his DNA test, it was altered beyond recognition. Chango begins to throw fire towards Peter, but after a brief struggle, Oya calls down a bolt of lightning to break the fight up, and Spider-Man tells them, "So long. Next time you need help, go ahead and ask someone else." The next day at the mall, Peter and Anna Maria watch as Julio plays the role of a mall Santa, asking everyone what they want for Christmas. Peter mentions that the man up there is not Julio, but Anna Maria says that his friends and family, even the Santerians, would disagree. As the two of them begin to leave, Julio calls out for everyone's attention. He tells everyone that the girl next to him is named Mindy, and the only thing that she wanted for Christmas were gifts for other people and nothing for herself. Everyone begins to clap, and Julio says that he thinks that she deserves something special for Christmas. And, as some of them know, Mindy is blind. He says that he might be able to do something for her and tells her to close her eyes and then open them. She opens her eyes and looks at the tree in front of her, telling everyone that she can see the tree, and everyone begins to cheer. Peter notices that there's someone there not clapping. In fact, that individual is actually running away. Moments later, Peter changes into Spider-Man and has the man up on a scaffolding, asking him why it is that he ran away when he saw Julio. It's like he saw a ghost. The man begins to stumble over his words, and he finally tells Peter it's because he was the one who killed Julio. He says that him and a buddy were going to mug him, so they pulled out a screwdriver. Julio told them that he needed their help. He then grabbed their arm and began stabbing himself with the screwdriver. Peter decides that he's done trying to find things out. He's gonna go talk to Julio directly. So, as Spider-Man, he goes to Julio's apartment and he climbs down through the chimney, and he quickly grabs Julio and jumps back out the window, and he swings up to a rooftop, tossing Julio aside. He tells him that it's time for him to talk, no more hiding. But Julio says that he's actually been dying to talk to him. All he wants to do is the Lord's work, with Spider-Man's help. Imagine the good that they could do, even with the help of the Avengers! But Spider-Man grabs Julio, telling him that he doesn't believe a word that he's saying, and would like to beat the truth out of him, but he's pretty sure that the dead don't feel pain. So maybe one of the Inhumans can get some facts out of him. Julio tells him to stop, but before Peter can leave, a police helicopter flies overhead, telling Peter to freeze. Spider-Man tells Julio that they will see each other again, and he jumps away. Later, Julio goes to the church asking for forgiveness for failing. He asked Spider-Man to join their cause, but instead, he made Spider-Man an enemy. And a voice tells him he did not fail. The heroes of the city were never meant to be their allies. The day approaches when they will come to me, and they will be the lambs to the slaughter. Peter begins to follow Julio wherever he goes, even the restroom, and once Julio is done, smoke begins to rise behind him, and through it, Babaloo steps out, telling him that it is time. The Almighty Lord will bless us and bring the spider to us. Peter jumps out of the vents, but as he tries to web the two of them up, Babaloo touches Julio and the web goes through them, and they begin to fade. Over at Don Anselmo's apartment, Oya and Ogun visit the Don to see if they can find out what could be wrong with Julio. Don begins preparing for a ritual as Don explains that Julio has lost his faith in his Catholic God, which is why Julio came to him, Don Anselo, to turn to Santeria. So he sent him to seek out Babaloo so he could be born anew. Don slams a knife down, cutting a chicken, and he continues explaining that Julio never believed in their God. He still wanted his Catholic God to save him. Then, out of a bowl that he was holding, a small serpent sticks its head out of the blood, and then it grows even larger and larger until it's bigger than everyone. Then it eats Don, and Ogun tries to open his mouth, but Don is soon spit back up, but as a much younger man. Oya asks how he did that, and he says he didn't. Ochumar did. This is what true faith can accomplish. Oya then says if that's the case, does he think that Julio's resurrection really is a miracle? And Don says no. Ochumar lifted the scales from his eyes. Julio is praying to a false god. Elsewhere in the city, Julio watches a bus pass, and he begins to smile. Soon the bus driver begins to have a heart attack and crashes the bus. People begin to shout out that people are dead and call 911, but Julio walks through the crash and he kneels down to a dead woman, and then he takes her hand, and soon she begins to open her eyes. The people begin to cheer, stating that Julio has helped reduce the number of deaths, and Peter sits by watching the news thinking how Julio knew this was gonna happen. In fact, he must have made it happen. But then the channels begin to change, and Peter sees Oya holding a sign stating that they need to talk to Spider-Man and that they're sorry. When Peter meets up with him, he says it's okay. He probably could have said what was going on with Julio better, maybe had a bit more tact. He's been told that he has quite a sass mouth. The Santerians explain that Julio is being controlled by something not of this world, and in order for a god to cross into their universe, he needs to cut a hole into the fabric of reality, and that cut leaves a mark, a celestial scar. Peter says that he knows just who can help them, so he takes everyone to see Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man. And Tony tells them that they've had so many galactic and dimensional incursions that he can't keep track of them anymore. But here's a map of all of those celestial scars. A giant map on the globe appears with marks, and Tony mentions that this guy is drawing power from all of these sparks, and the largest one is right here in Harlem. I can give you the address if you'd like. Everyone begins to head to the cemetery where Julio is buried, and that's where they see Julio sitting on his grave telling everyone, right on time. Soon creatures from within the grave begin to rise, and Peter calls out to the Santerians, prepare for battle, or something, I'm not used to battle cries. Peter and the Santerians begin to fight off the creatures, and Shango tells Julio to stop fighting, they want to help him. Julio begins to project energy and blast everyone away, but while they're still trying to fight off the creatures, Tony radios in stating that whatever's going on over there, that scar turned into an interdimensional gate. The Santerians begin to use their powers to fight, and Tony says, whoa, 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 whatever you guys are doing, don't do it again, because the portal just opened up by another 12%. Spider-Man tells everyone to stop using their powers, and everyone tries to hide. Peter is then slammed into a wall, and he begins to see Uncle Ben again. Spider-Man tells Uncle Ben that he's trying to save Julio, but Uncle Ben says that he can't. Julio was brought back by dark power. He's not supposed to be alive, so just let it end. Sometimes death is a blessing in disguise, like mine. Spider-Man jumps back into battle, stating that you're not my uncle! And as another creature gets ready to attack Peter, Uncle Ben yells out at the monster to leave him alone. He then runs and hides behind a gravestone, and then as the creature turns around to get him, he's gone. Peter begins to think about how did that creature see Uncle Ben? So he was real! And then he hears one of the Santerians yelling, what did you do to Julio? Peter sees Elega punching Julio, telling him he'll just have to look for himself. Elega begins to look into Julio's eyes, and then he begins to see Julio in Cuba with Babalu. Julio hears a voice, and Julio believes what he's hearing is the word of God telling him that he will be tested. He must carry the life force of God inside of him to open the door to the mortal world. And Julio accepts this task, and he tells him that his life and soul will be his lord's. Tony radios in stating that they need to make a move soon, because that portal is now at 70%. And Babalu begins to charge at Elega with a spear, telling him that he will not interfere with the Master's plans. But Elega grabs him, telling him he will pass, and then he stabs him with the spear. Elega then calls out to the rest of the Santerians to hear him. The Santerians' eyes begin to widen, and Oya says that Julio has bonded his life with that alien, and the only way to stop it is to sever the tie, and to do that they have to kill Julio. Peter says that he won't let them kill his friend, and as he tries to stop them, Elega grabs Julio by the head, and then snap. The creatures begin to fall from the sky, and the portal closes, and all Spider-Man can do is hold Elega. A few days later, Julio is given another burial service, but Peter is upset because he thought they were supposed to save him, not harm him. Elega says that he couldn't save his body, but he believed that he saved Julio's soul. Ocean says that if it makes him feel better, he can stay mad at them as long as he wants, but just know, Julio is in a better place. Peter tells her that she really believes that, doesn't she? And she tells him, with everything he's seen, why can't he? Later, Peter visits the church, even though he doesn't believe in miracles, because if that was the case, Uncle Ben would still be here. But after walking into the church, Peter knocks on the confessional booth to ask the Father if he's got a minute. And that is the conclusion to the Spider-Man side story about him dealing with faith. I found it quite interesting, but there's a few unanswered questions here that I'm really hoping they come back to answering later, but normally with these side stories, they don't go back to them. So I would really like to know more about this whole thing and where Uncle Ben came from and all of this, but maybe we're all supposed to chalk it up to faith. I don't know, but hopefully we'll find out eventually. I'm Benny the Comicstorian, and I hope you guys enjoyed this story. Follow me on Twitter at Comicstorian, subscribe to the channel for more Spider-Man, and I'll see you next time right here.